Fine. So we're learning a sikha actually right now from the Rebbe about Chanukah, about the prayers of Chanukah, and what's Chanukah all about. So in the prayers of Chanukah, we have in the Amidah, also in benching and Birkat Hamazon, the grace after meal, we say Alanisim as it's called. And in that prayer of Alanisim, we mention that we lit candles, Bechatzrit Kechecha, in the courtyards in your courtyards, we kindled the flames. So most commentators look at that as in reference to the golden menorah, but the Rebbe says no, it's in reference to many menorahs that were lit, because this is the way we celebrate. We celebrate with light. How can we say that there should be no mention about the light, the miracle of the menorah in our prayers? When also we see in the Talmud, when it asks what's Hanukkah, the Talmud doesn't even mention the war. In our prayers, we mention the war at length. And we don't mention the menorah, the miracle of the menorah. Yet the Talmud barely just references that after winning the war, excuse me, after winning the war, we lit many lights in the courtyards, plural. Sorry, yeah, that's in the prayer. When the Talmud asks what's Hanukkah, so it barely mentions the war, and it mentions the miracle of finding one flask of oil, and so on. So in the Gemara, we actually have a question: why doesn't it mention the military victory, as we do in our prayers? So there's a great paradox over here that we need to understand. So the Rebbe says that, an idea that's been spoken many times is that the war against the Greeks was more of a spiritual war than it was a physical war, even though there was a physical war. But really what they wanted to do is eradicate not Judaism, but our connection to God in Judaism. And in the prayers, we say that that they wanted to make us forget your Torah, and I was forget you, God, that it's your Torah. Everybody has to have a tradition. Everybody has to have a path. Everybody has to have teachings. The Greeks have Greek philosophy, so not a problem that you have Torah philosophy, but not that it's you, God. No. And likewise to violate the decree of your wills, the fact that God wants you to put on tefillin, the fact that God wants you to be charitable, the fact that God wants you to keep the Sabbath and circumcision, those are specific decrees on circumcision and Shabbos, Sabbath, because they bring out the connection to God. They wanted to destroy that. Well, that's the whole spirit of Judaism. Of course. And that's what they wanted to wipe out. Yes, there was a war, but that was the main thing, right? But this time we can explain why the miracle of Hanukkah regarding spiritual salvation was specifically with the lights of the menorah. Right? The Greeks, they defiled the entire base of Mikdash, and we had to rededicate the altar, all the vessels of the sanctuary, and God made a miracle occur specifically with the lights of the menorah. Why? Because when you want to speak about spiritual things, and remember, that's what the main issue, the main contention between the Greeks and the Jewish people was of a spiritual nature, destroying Judaism as, a spiritual connection and as a connection to God. So when you speak about spirituality, light is the language of spirituality, as the verse says. The mitzvah is a lamp and Torah is the light. So from all of creation, all of the things in the physical world, right? Specifically, light is what has a spiritual nature to it, as opposed to sound, right? Even though sound, is a vibration, but sound comes from somewhere, from someone, from something, right? Sight and smell, right? Sight, you're seeing a physical thing. Smell emanates from a physical substance, right? Right. Even though you might say about sound, it itself has no substance, right? But it is anchored in a physical thing in the movements of physical air. And, most likely, and smell for sure is a scent that's being spread from an object. By contrast, light, which comes with sight, right? Um, so light is the most spiritual of creation. And therefore, it is what we refer to, right? Now, all right. What was the idea of the menorah? Right. Is that the divine presence of God, the Shekhinah, rests amongst the Jewish people. The light wasn't needed to illuminate the holy temple. No, it was there to bring a message to the world that the Shekhinah, the divine presence, rests with God, with the Jewish people, rather. Right. Which now it's interesting. We say there were 10 miracles that happened. And one of the miracles that happened in the Holy Temple is that the menorah, the light of the menorah, never extinguished. Which, how do we understand it with the other miracles people saw? But this miracle was in the holies. No one saw that, right? No, not everybody's permitted to go there, as opposed to the other miracles actually happened in the courtyard where people could see it. So, therefore, we have to conclude that there is physical light, but the light that we're talking about is a spiritual light that connects with the physical light of the menorah, which that spiritual light of the divine presence of God, that's what it represents, connected with the physical light, has a greater effect on illuminating the world than the light with the light of the Shekhinah. That's why the miracle specifically involves the light of the menorah. that influenced all of mankind to recognize that Shekhinah rests with Israel. In other words, it wasn't something that was palpably seen, so it's more bringing out the idea that the light is spiritual, right? There's physical light and spiritual light. So the spiritual light of the menorah is that it represents the fact that the divine presence of God is with the Jewish people. So that is connected with the physical light, right? Because there's a physical lighting of the menorah that represents this idea that the divine presence, that all of mankind should recognize that the Shekhinah is with us. Well, no one saw that. So, of course, it's spiritual light that we're talking about. So this explains why the spiritual salvation of Chanukah is connected with the miracle of the flask of oil for the menorah. It's not incidental miracle, but this is the miracle of the victory of the days of Chanukah was expressing. What does that mean? They wanted us to transgress your Torah and your will, right? Which is in other words, that's a godly light, which is higher than intellect. And that shines with the Jew, and it's revealed in the miracle. For the miracle is elevated to a higher place than nature it means something that's greater than nature. And connection with the light of the menorah, which the light of the menorah is a vessel for the godly light that's higher than creation. So we're saying there's a spiritual light and a physical light, right? So there's the Torah and the customs and things that we do as Jews. And then there's the spiritual of it that's beyond creation. Just like the spiritual light is beyond creation. So also there's the Torah that's beyond creation. What's that? That it's your Torah, God's Torah. It's his will is the mitzvah. That's something beyond creation. How about that idea of, well, okay, now we can ask, based on this idea, there's the spiritual light, the physical light, that's connected with physical light, right? Spiritual light is something beyond, something is beyond, you know, beyond perception, beyond our apprehension, comprehension. But it's connected with the physical light. So two things. There is the light of the menorah that's spiritual, that represents the idea of the Shekhinah as always with the Jewish people. It's connected with the physical light, but it's obviously that notion that the nations of the world should recognize that is a spiritual idea that's beyond, right? Because very few people actually saw the light because it was in the holies. Likewise, what happened in Chanukah, that the Greeks, the Hellenists wanted us to, it was a spiritual thing that's beyond nature that they wanted to eradicate in us. Beyond nature they wanted. Meaning that it's your Torah, it's your will. Eradicate that, get that out of, right? To have Torah is okay. Everybody needs a wisdom. Everybody needs teachings. To have customs and stuff, okay. Just don't connect to something beyond, to God, right? Okay, based on all of this, then we can understand why the Gemara asks, what is Chanukah? For the miracle, for which miracle was it established? Right? Because there were two miracles, miracle of the war and miracle of the flask of oil, right? So when they're asking, they're omitting the war completely. Why? Because that's not what defines Hanukkah. Point of Hanukkah, it's a spiritual light. The mitzvah is a lamp, right? Which illuminated via a spiritual victory. Even though there was a physical miracle, right? And that's an introduction to the spiritual miracle. Because it was a physical miracle, winning the war, no doubt, right? Because without that, you couldn't rededicate the temple. And therefore you couldn't have the miracle of the lights. And no doubt. Nevertheless, the spiritual miracle exists. The physical matter and the miracles really don't take up space. That's not what Hanukkah is. And that's why it's not mentioned. Uh, when the Talmud said, what's Hanukkah? Because they have a dilemma. There's two things: physical victory, spiritual victory. In the end, it's a spiritual victory. The physical victory is is only a means to an end. It's not the end in itself. And therefore, the means is not mentioned because it's insignificant compared to the spiritual victory. Now, let's use that same logic the other way around. When you want to give thanks to God, right? Remember, the Talmud is asking, what is Hanukkah? It's asking, if you will, a philosophical question. What's prayer about? Thanksgiving. Well, an element of prayer is to thank God. Well, when it comes to thanking God, we're only thanking Him for the military victory. We're not thanking Him for the spiritual victory. You know why? Because the same logic, the spiritual victory is so powerful and so much more meaningful that it would give no space to the physical military victory. And therefore, we don't mention it. Wow. The opposite, right? The opposite way. Wow, wow, wow. What does this teach us? It teaches a powerful lesson. Yes, we have a body and a soul. But when it comes to thanking God, so in the physical things you got to thank Him for, right? Absolutely. But when it comes to, like, who are you? You're a physical body. You're a spiritual being in a physical dimension, a body and physical world. The spiritual of us should be so emphatic, so clear that the physical is no mention. Wow, wow, wow. Very powerful. A lot to digest over there. L'chaim, l'chaim. Thank you, folks. We'll see you by Chumash and Rashi soon. A very anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
God bless.